Welcome. Hansard ready? Okay, we're ready to go. I declare open this meeting of the Senate Select Committee on the National Broadband Network. I'm Senator Kate Lundy, the chair of this committee, and with me today I have Senator Sed Selja, the deputy chair, and Senator Lynn Thorpe. Senator Anne Ruston will be joining us a little later. I'd like to welcome you all here today. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings is being made. The audio proceedings is being broadcast live via the Australian Parliament House website. Before the committee starts taking evidence, I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It's also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. A witness called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and the capacity in which they appear, and witnesses should speak clearly into the microphones to help Hansard to record proceedings. The committee prefers all evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. It is important that witnesses give the committee notice if they intend to do this. And if a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the grounds. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that that answer be given in camera or in private, and such a request may, of course, be also made at any other time. I'd like to remind people in the hearing room to ensure, please, that your mobile phones are off or switched to silence. And on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank our witnesses appearing today for their cooperation with this inquiry. I'd now like to welcome our first witness, Mr. Pascal Grosvenor. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name, even though I've now said it, and the capacity in which you appear today?
Sure, yes. My name is Pascal Grosvenor, and I'm appearing to discuss the submission to the Senate committee that myself and two other people put in, which was named My Broadband vs. Reality.
Thank you. Are there any amendments or changes to your submission you'd like to make, or do you have an opening statement you'd like to make now?
Yeah, I do have an opening statement I'd like to make. Right. We don't have any amendments to our submission. One thing we have done, though, is we did a big part of the submission was a survey, and we did of people around Australia, and we have done a follow-up survey since then. So I may well refer to that, but I don't have it published up as a document or something to be able to hand up at this time. So.
Well, that's okay, but if we could ask you when it is available to forward it to the committee so we can have it as part of our evidence, that would be terrific. But now please proceed to your opening statement.
Sure, thank you. So as I mentioned, I guess I'd like to start by, giving the sort of context or background that led us to doing this Senate submission and how it all sort of came about. I guess myself, I'm a pretty sort of IT techie type person. I work in IT doing systems administration, and I guess I'm a very sort of active internet user, whether it's for a number of different things, and also quite interested in what's happening with the national broadband network and how that's going to be deployed, how long will it take to be deployed, what type of technologies are going to be used to deploy it, and obviously the differences between what the Labor government was saying they were going to build and roll out through NBN Co, and the changes that are now happening under the present Liberal National government. So the survey really started when after Malcolm Turnbull announced the My Broadband website, the official government one, where people could go to check what internet broadband services were available in their area. And then sort of quite quickly on Twitter, a Twitter discussion sort of got going, which found a number of people were going to the My Broadband website and getting an estimate from there, which was saying they should get such and such speed or such and such quality of internet service. And then when they did their own speed tests, they were finding that it was, for many of them, what they actually got was significantly less than what the My Broadband website was telling them. So it sort of started as a question on Twitter by my other colleague that helped did a huge bit of the survey, Nolly Neat, and she sort of asked, what are people getting? And we suddenly started to quite quickly get a number of people saying, well, our speeds aren't what the My Broadband website is saying we should get. So then she had the good idea of doing up a survey, and she works in small business and web design, so between her and her husband, they created a survey page on a website and invited people to put their own responses up to check the My Broadband website to see what they got there, and then to use one of the publicly available speed test utilities that there's quite a few of on the internet to try and test and get what the actual speed was. And so then that survey went up on the page. We promoted it via Twitter, Facebook and other social media and things. And before we knew it, 800 people had replied, a bit over 800 people had replied to the survey. So we were really sort of blown away by the number of people that gave it a go and seemed interested in it. And so a big part of that survey was getting that information of whether the actual speeds matched the estimates from the My Broadband website. But almost as important, once we started collecting all the survey stuff, was that we had a section for people to be able to just give a general comment about what their internet service or quality was like, just sort of like an open text field where they could just type whatever they wanted. And that, in some ways, ended up turning out even more useful information than the actual speed stuff was. And so then we got to the point where we felt like we had all this really great information about people from across Australia and what their experiences of using the internet or having their internet connection were like, that it would be a shame just to leave it there. And so we came up with knowing that there was the NBN Select Senate Committee, we came up with the idea of collating that stuff and putting it into a survey submission. So that's when we then went on we came up with the My Broadband versus Reality sort of hashtag thing a bit, and social media and all that, which has played a very big role in this submission and even in the collaboration and getting other people involved and promoting it. So then we went through and we did up the submission, I guess, which hopefully all had a bit of a chance to have a look through. Or
we do have that, thank you.
Okay, great. And which in itself, the submission process was quite a really interesting exercise in teamwork and collaboration, because there were there were four of us that did probably the biggest chunk of the work. Nolly Neat, Paul Davis, myself and Caitlin Neat. And we put this the submission together collaboratively using Google Docs and the Google Hangouts chat. And we were actually working from a series of different locations. I was here in Sydney. Nolly and Caitlin were up at the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and Paul Davis is currently overseas in Tokyo. But we did this great, quite fun in a way, collaboration, and in and of itself, it sort of showed what the capability is with good internet to be able to work, what sort of productivity or efficiency you can get working with a team that's is geographically sort of spread out. But even during the time of putting together that submission, Nolly up in the Sunshine Coast had their internet connection drop out on multiple occasions while we were trying to put the submission together. So it was just another example of the difficulties at times. As I mentioned, so we came up with, we collated it all together, and in our submission we put, we sort of split it into some various categories, and so generally there's a page each on a number of different issues, like the effect that weather can have, particularly on any type of internet connection that's based on the copper wires that are part of the Telstra sort of phone network that's been there for many years. Also issues around congestion or speed, or even the ongoing maintenance, and the issue that a lot of people talked about experiencing problems with their internet connection and having to get, I guess, Telstra or Optus technicians to come out and look at the connection or work on the node at the end of their street, and in quite a few cases not having any internet for several days or a week or even longer perhaps. So I guess I won't try and go through all the detail of exactly all of those, but if I could direct you to the first page of the survey where we set out, based on everything we found, we put out 9 key recommendations for the committee's consideration, and stuff like, I guess of number one importance was that the weather and environmental factors should be considered during any significant discussion about broadband. We found that on the My Broadband website, the government one, there was in the FAQ section, it said that in their analysis or calculations of possible speeds, factors including the weather weren't taken into account, and we regarded that as a major omission. Some of the other things that we also recommended is that we believe that broadband is a critical infrastructure in this century, perhaps as important as electricity, water, or any other type of utilities. And also the importance that whatever national broadband network is deployed, it needs to be able to grow in speed and bandwidth to match the sort of growth in the Australian economy and the sort of transition that we're going through into a much more sort of knowledge economy or information age, digital age, where a lot more of what we do these days is online or interacting. So, and I might stop talking in a second, but so that's I guess a summary of the submission that we made. Since then, we decided to do a follow-up survey. After the first survey, we realised a couple of things that we hadn't really covered in that first survey, such as what are the main things people use the internet for, and so we did cover that as part of this second survey. So we had a few more questions. And I'll endeavour to get together with my sort of Paul and Nolia a bit of a summary of that second survey and something that we can actually present officially to the committee. But that second survey had over 1,000 people complete it, and broadly speaking, it confirmed the same sort of things that the first survey did, that the actual speeds that survey respondents were getting were significantly less than what the My Broadband website stated they should get. And it also found things like, one of the big things we asked for was what people use the internet for, and it found that I'll find it very quickly. Had the graph open here before. The things that people most used the internet for, according to the survey responses, were banking and paying bills, news and weather, being socially connected like friends, family, Skype, social media and email. And in fourth place was stuff like games, watching videos, iView and that type of thing. So it's, I think to us that showed that there's actually quite a lot of things people are relying on the internet these days for to be able to do. It's high-speed broadband is not just about, say, being able to watch the latest movie in high definition. It's actually essential for a lot of other purposes. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you
very much, Mr. Grosvenor. Can I begin by congratulating you and your team on the way in which you've done this work? Obviously, your motivation for doing a survey, I think, was, to find out what people's experience was, but to use such an open methodology to collate that, it's like you've gone out and crowdsourced good information about people's broadband reality. And we're very grateful as a committee that you've been able to, again, collaborate and pull that together in a very comprehensive submission. It's not that often that the committees will get an insight into such a broad base of data. We certainly rely on the public sector, the departments and so forth to bring that to our attention. So to get an alternative perspective in such a orderly and coordinated way, an effective way, is extremely helpful. So if you could pass that on to your colleagues and
sure
co-collaborators, that would be wonderful.
Okay. hopefully they're listening on at the moment. But
Excellent. Well, there's a big shout out to them. It's a very impressive piece of work. I'd just like to go to your first recommendation, and we do have the written submission, and like you said, we won't have time to go through each aspect of it. But this issue of weather. Now, this committee and other Senate committees focused on all things to do with bandwidth have heard for a long time now, the issues about inclement weather and the effect on copper, the copper network's reliability. So I'd just like you to spend a little bit of time now to give us a feel for the feedback you got from your survey participants about the impact of weather. Is it something that everyone experiences? Is it something that some of them experience, noting that your survey's focused on people who access their bandwidth via copper, via ADSL style services?
yes.
And why have you put it at the top of your list of 9 recommendations?
Right. I think the reason for that was that I guess we probably found it was the biggest issue or challenge that people were facing with the quality of their internet. We found from the survey responses that I think it was 86% of the people that filled out the survey use ADSL as their method to connect to the internet, and also so we found that was by far the most dominant method that people are currently using, or at least the people that filled our survey out are currently using to connect to the internet. And yes, and I guess as an additional thing to mention, we did, of course, produce the submission document. We also submitted the raw data that we had collected, all the individual survey responses. Of course, people's names and addresses or anything like that, we attempted as best we could to remove that so that there was no specific identifying information, because we took the privacy of the people that filled it out was very important to us. It certainly wasn't. We didn't want to use the survey for any sort of commercial or ulterior means or whatnot. It was just trying to very openly show this is what a bunch of people around Australia, what their internet is like. And so in the comments to those survey responses, rain got mentioned 63 times out of 800-something responses. So, and this was in the free comment section. This was not...
This wasn't a multiple choice rain question.
No. This is if the on the very last page of our submission, page 16, is a screenshot of what the survey looked like and the questions people were asked. And where those comments about rain got mentioned is in that bottom box there that says comments. So there was there's no sort of leading question or asking could you, or a list of possible problems and tick the ones that you had. It was just an open comment where we said, please feel free to put any comments about about your internet. And so, rain got mentioned 63 times. So we thought that was really quite significant. We also found that it wasn't only rain that causes an issue, but also if the temperature gets very high. We had people, to quote from a person they filled out in our responses, somebody that lives at Glenbrook in New South Wales. They said, "I have never seen speeds above 4 megabits per second where I live. I have excellent equipment and service with iiNet. Every time it rains heavily, my speed gets slower. When the temperature breaks 35 degrees, my internet stops working." So it's I mean, rain was the one that's the biggest issue, but it also seems that the copper can be susceptible to quite high temperatures as well. And there were other people who also commented on the heat being an issue as well. So as to... And I guess, as we sort of pointed out, Australia is a country that has droughts and significant floods and times of heavy rainfall and the like. And so it seemed to us really to be missing a key factor in not including that in the calculations for the My Broadband website. Another person said, who lives in Albany Creek, Queensland, try running a small business from home when the faulty copper wire connection keeps failing after even moderate fall of rain. Phone line quality impossible, internet experiences problems, and we can never consider video for Skype. Even voice Skype connections are often poor. And so I think, and that's on page 5, sorry, I'm reading that from, by the way. So I don't think this is the weather is an issue that affects everybody, and we didn't try to really sort of quantify that exactly what percentage it does. But with so many people using ADSL as their way to connect to the internet, it's sort of, to us, I guess we found that there was at least a significant proportion of people who, the rain particularly really just stuffed around with their internet connection.
No, thank you for that. That, I guess, represents a corroboration of previous evidence that we've heard. We've seen many images as a committee of the way in which the copper network has been maintained, including plastic bags around connections.
Yes, I've seen
the
those
use
too.
of gel that failed, and by and large the poor state of the copper network. So it's very important for this committee to hear from a user perspective fairly what I would consider to be the most direct evidence to date that it's raining outside, my network's not working, corroborates the evidence that we've seen about the what happens in the actual pits when it rains, and the sort of protection, wet protection or lack thereof, of the actual physical network as well.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess it just reminded me of something I think I neglected to mention in my opening statement, and that was that it was very important to us in doing this submission. We were quite aware that there's lots of industry experts and industry groups and other people that have written very technical submissions, which are great, which go into all the the specific technologies and pluses and minuses of those. To us, it was really important with this submission to reflect what it is like for everyday Australians, not to get caught up in all the sort of ADSL or HFC or fibre to the premise and the specific communication protocols or things they use, but just to talk about, what's it like for people using internet from home or trying to run a small business from their house.
Yeah, and I note in your submission also that you reflect upon the fact that during a Senate estimates hearing it was established that the department in their analysis of broadband quality in Australia didn't take into account the weather or rain specifically.
Yes.
You're obviously concerned about that, hence it's at the top of your list of recommendations. But what do you think should happen? How could you factor in the weather and rain into, the formal government analysis of broadband quality? Should weather patterns be acknowledged, or should there be a general sort of qualifier with respect to copper? So I guess I'm looking for your ideas of how do we make consumers aware that the network is unreliable in certain weather conditions, and what's the most effective way for that to be reflected in advice to consumers in your view and your experience?
Okay, sure, thank you. I think, as I found on the My Broadband website, there is a mention of it, but it's rather hidden away, I think, in an FAQ to the methodology of how the figures will come up with. So I don't think my feel is that the typical person isn't going to follow that and read that far. So I think it needs to be stated a lot more clearly right up the top. And possibly too, another issue that we found is that I guess a lot of the people that responded to the survey, internet's important to them, but they generally at times could get a bit confused or overwhelmed by the technology and the different things, and even questions about oh, well, is my connection ADSL, or is that the same thing as cable or HFC, or am I on wireless? And there was significant confusion at times for people about even which technology they were currently using to connect to the internet. And knowing that the current plan is for NBN Co to use the sort of mixed technology sort of mix of ADSL and HFC, existing HFC, the sort of Optus, Telstra, Foxtel type stuff, and fibre to the premises in some cases, and then fixed wireless for others. I think there'll be confusion amongst people which type of service they'll be provided by the NBN, and then whether the weather has an effect will be a bit confusing too, because it depends, I guess,
because
on
different
what type
technologies will be affected by the weather in different ways.
Yes, yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, because I think I'm sort of going slightly out on a limb, but I think even the sort of wireless type technologies, heavy rain or weather, can also have an impact on that. I'm not 100% sure on that one. But so I guess my suggestion then certainly would be if people are going to the My Broadband website to try and determine what internet service they're going to get from NBN Co if it rolls out to their area, it should sort of state, I guess, first off very clearly what type of internet connection they'll get, whether it's ADSL or satellite or fibre to the premise. And then, for example, if it states that it's ADSL and gives a speed estimate, almost straight away it should say, sort of almost a big note, weather can have a big impact on your speed or the quality. And I guess the problem is that, from what I gather, I guess the My Broadband website attempted to gather data from a number of places, from what I understand, public, information that the government already had, and information from Telstra and the networks and internet service providers and the like. But I still don't know whether they can really, in doing that, whether they can factor in the individual quality of nodes or pits or exchanges in a whole bunch of different
I think we already know the answer to that is no.
No,
Mr. Grosvenor, that really takes us to the next page of your submission, which is the graph. Now,
sure.
we haven't got our PowerPoint presentation here today.
Okay.
But I'd like you just to describe what's happening on the graph and how that relates to the publicised speeds that people are believed to, or that My Broadband says they can get, but what the reality is for the people you've surveyed. So if you could just read the description of the graph for the Hansard record, please. Sure.
I guess, yes, so what we tried to do with that graph, looking at the graph there, on the left, on the sort of vertical column there, is the reality, is the actual speed that people got when they used I think it was ozspeedtest.net, I think, is the site that we recommended people use to get a measure of their actual internet speed. So that speed on the left there is the actual speed they got when they ran a test to try and see what speed their internet connection was going at. Along the bottom, the horizontal, is the speed that they were given from the My Broadband website when they went there and they put their address in, and then it locates your position on the map, and you say, is this actually your suburb or area? And yes, and then it gives you an estimate of what speed you can get. So what the graph shows then is the black diagonal line across, running from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, shows what would be anything along that line shows that your actual speed matched the estimate that you got from the My Broadband website. So if we take, for example, a My Broadband estimate of 10 megabits per second down the bottom, and then go across to the reality and look for 10, where they actually got 10 megabits per second, then you'd have a little diamond that's actually right on that black line, which means their speed matched the estimate. But so then what happens is, for things below the line, is where, let's say, just taking 10 here's a good example. Taking, say, 15 megabits, an estimate of 15 megabits per second. There's a couple of diamonds there right on that 15 megabits per second, the line coming up from the horizontal. And say, for example, there's a point where it's about, the estimate is saying that they should get 15 megabits per second, but the actual speed that they got was more like 8 megabits per second. So the diamond shows there is way below the black line, where the black line for that speed would be saying, I got the same speed as the estimate I was supposed to be given. So then sort of looking at it as a whole then, what we found from the graph was, for one thing, was a huge concentration of diamonds or survey responses in the speed range of 0 to almost about 8 megabits per second. So the majority of survey respondents were only tending to get 8 megabits per second as their highest possible speed.
Right.
And then what you can sort of see visually is that there were very, very few people where their actual reality speed was greater than the estimate from the My Broadband website. And that's the few diamonds that are above that black diagonal line, whereas the vast majority are actually tend to be considerably below that black line, and in a lot of cases below the red line even, and that red sort of line represents where your actual speed is only 50% of what the My Broadband estimate was. So, for example, if I looked at the going along the horizontal at the bottom, and if I looked at 20 there, where you'd got an estimate of 20 megabits per second from the My Broadband website, and there's a diamond, say, around the red line, then that means that they only actually got about 10 megabits per second in reality. So yeah, there's an awful lot where it's below that, yeah.
Well, it looks almost as like with that red line, which, as you say, is 50%, effectively half of what the My Broadband website estimates. That seems to be a line representing perhaps average, or maybe just under the average of the speeds that people are receiving.
Yes.
So it's a very good illustration of how the My Broadband website estimates not quite, but represent almost the ceiling speed,
Yes.
the maximum speed, rather than the average speed, which is certainly what the website implies.
Yes.
Is that a fair observation?
I think so, yes, because I think, if I remember correctly, I think the website talks about the median speed people should receive, and which means it should be the middle speed, but we didn't find it anywhere near the median. So, and we admit ourselves, I think, in the at the top of that page where the graph is, I'm just trying to find, where did we mention? I mean, we admit that this wasn't done as a scientific survey. We didn't try to calculate means or standard deviations or confidence intervals or any type of statistical measures, because we know that this was a self-selected survey of people following this out. It wasn't a thoroughly scientific random samples from across the country type thing. So
could be more likely to be people frustrated with their broadband.
Possibly, yes. But even though that's the case, and there could be some survey bias in a way. Actually, it was page 4 of the submission where we talk about the possibility of selection bias, which can also be a risk for lots of surveys. We still felt that looking at it visually, we thought, well, even still, there's a very clear picture there of speeds not being up to what the My Broadband website said they should be.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's a very useful piece of work. I should check my colleague, Senator Seselja. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. I wanted to, I guess, follow on from some of the discussions and the sort of speed test function that's been added to the site. I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I think it was added in April. Has that added to the usability of the My Broadband site? Do you see that as an improvement where we can actually get some of the speeds and get, I guess, some more accurate data over time?
I do, yes. I had noticed that has been added to the site, and April makes sense because I certainly don't recall it being there at the time that we put this Senate submission together.
Yeah.
I think that is a good thing, that it gives people a. I know that the My Broadband website, and I don't understand the methodology in really, to a very high level of detail of how the calculations were made for the median speeds. And I know it was trying to make an estimate as to what people will get, but I think having that sort of independent or other way to come up with the speed estimate by using those speed testing utilities, yes, I think that's been a good addition to the website. And so that's also, and then is that being collected actually, that data's being collected via the website, so getting a sample of what people's speeds are actually getting. Well, that sounds like a good thing too, because one of our recommendations was, I think our last one was that the committee, number 9, the committee includes regular community feedback in any discussion about broadband, and yeah, we thought that's really important, as this is a, I guess as I understand it, the idea of NBN Co and the National Broadband Network is to sort of roll out this high-speed internet for pretty much all Australians, and we're talking about sort of 20-something million people. So ensuring that we get the feedback of those everyday people as part of the process is very important.
Great. Now, do you, in looking through your recommendations, there isn't anything sort of there on end user pricing. Do you have any views on that? Obviously, one of the challenges in rolling out a broadband network is at what cost. Everyone would like to have the fastest speeds that we can possibly get, but there's obviously some equations around costs. So I'm interested in your views around, if we do see significant costs for end users, do you see that as being a problem, or does your group not see particular problems with high costs for broadband?
That's a good question. We didn't examine cost to any great extent as part of the survey that we did. Like, for example, as part of the survey questions, we never asked what internet plans people have, like what was their sort of monthly download quota, or what speed were they given that they were supposed to get, or how much they were paying per month. So I guess we didn't really form an opinion too much on the, I guess, you're asking what would, say, be the cost per month, or for a 12 or 24 month contract for a person using the NBN Co or something? Is that? Yeah, well, look, obviously,
I mean, you've made a lot of recommendations, which, many of them are sensible recommendations, that the broadband network can grow in speed and bandwidth, all those sort of things. And but obviously, always when these things are being considered, the costs either to the government directly through rolling out the broadband network, or in addition to, or alternatively to end users, is going to be an important factor in what you can deliver, what people are prepared to pay, that sort of thing. So I'm interested in your views on that, because obviously there's many things we can all agree on in terms of the need for better broadband, but there's always a limit to how much people are prepared to pay for that better broadband, either through taxes or through direct charges. So it is absent in those recommendations. So I'm just interested in if you have any views on whether or not keeping costs down will be an important factor for making the NBN accessible.
Okay. As a pardon me, we didn't sort of look at that as a survey question, or try to gather feedback on what sort of what amount of money people were prepared to pay for what they considered to be a high speed or reliable broadband service. I certainly, I guess my personal view, I would certainly sort of. I'd certainly say I wouldn't expect, say, somebody to get fibre to the premises and get really sort of fast speeds and only have to pay $40 a month for that or something. Like, I guess I would acknowledge there's obviously going to be a decent cost to a person for their broadband internet access, particularly if it's very high speed, and particularly, say, if it's fibre and it doesn't suffer from any of those weather or weather issues with ADSL or congestion issues that affect HFC, from my understanding. But we didn't formulate any sort of idea about what we thought would be a reasonable price or cost per person to have a broad NBN connection. The only other point I would make was our recommendation 8 about the committee includes consideration of equity of internet access in any discussion about broadband. And I think with that one, we felt it was or is very important that sorry, just trying to think of how I wanted to say it. That the internet is becoming so key to so much of what we do these days, whether it's paying bills, whether it's banking, whether it's accessing more and more government services are going online, whether it's keeping in contact with friends or family, whether it's for entertainment, even other applications like running a small business from home or growing sort of, I've read a bit about sort of telehealth and the growing use of high-speed internet in various health type applications or whatnot. So the point that we wanted to make about that is that we think it's important that there's a decent decent minimum internet speed available for all people across Australia, whether it's delivered by fibre to the premise or whether fixed wireless or whether it has some other technology in some case. I guess, we didn't have a what we thought would be a fair cost or an actual cost for each person, but we did believe that it's important that this sort of infrastructure is available to pretty much all Australians.
So,
we certainly wouldn't want it to be that, I don't know, let's say the minimum was $150, and if you couldn't afford $150 per month, then you'd miss out on the broadband network. We would think that would be very unequitable or whatnot.
Yeah, but if I understand your processes, your sort of survey was developed after getting a lot of feedback from the 800 odd internet users who were giving you information, giving you comments. So, is it fair to suggest then that the reason you didn't put costs in your survey is because that wasn't something that was particularly raised by the 800 or so who were giving you feedback and giving you comments?
Yes, I think that'd be correct. I don't think there was a lot of mention about cost in the comments. Certainly we didn't have any questions specifically to ask about cost, and I guess in the comments I'd have to go back and quickly run through all the responses myself, which is in that second attachment to the survey submission. But I don't recall there being a lot of discussion about cost.
Okay. Just finally from me, one of the priorities for the government in rolling out the NBN is to make sure we get it out as quickly as possible to areas with either no broadband or very limited broadband access. Obviously, some regional areas, some outer suburban areas which have very poor internet access. I mean, is that something that your group or you individually, is that a goal that you support, that should be a priority, getting it to those who basically either have none or have very poor broadband services at the moment?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that is important, and I think that probably goes a bit to when we were saying with our recommendation about the equity of internet access, especially. Especially because some people, they may have got my broadband may have said they should be getting 17 megabits per second, and in reality they might be getting 10 megabits per second. And while a faster speed would be great and would enable them to do more, we're more concerned about the people, and there were ones in the survey which were sort of limping along at 2 megabits per second or even less. Mm-hmm. And for those, I also participate in some of the discussions on the Whirlpool forums about the NBN, which I'm sure you all have heard of. And for example, there was a person there that posted quite recently that said they have one internet, an ADSL connection for their office, their business office, and it's typically only getting about 2.5 megabits per second, and 20 people are having to share that one connection, which is just crazy and would make their day-to-day, doing their business work incredibly slower and less efficient than it should be. So certainly prioritising areas that don't get much, currently very missing or black spots, we agree is very important. And I guess a bit of our concern was, because we found these instances where the estimates that the My Broadband website were giving were a lot higher than what people were actually getting, we were concerned that if the data from the My Broadband website is what's being used to prioritise the areas that should be attended to first, we're not sure how... we had concerns about whether that data is really highlighting the black spots properly or not.
Thanks, Senator Seselja, and welcome to Senator Anne Ruston. That's a tidy segue to the last area of questions that I wanted to put to you today, and that's about congestion. DSL technology is the way it's set up. Often you make the point well in your submission, in your segment on the crowded house,
yes,
that those at times of peak load, for example, you mentioned after school and homework time.
Yeah.
It's probably putting the most positive spin on it as you possibly can. But also, obviously, the peak load in the evenings as well often has a degrading effect on the availability of bandwidth, not only in a given house, like my house, where we use a wireless router to distribute. In fact, I'm on a VDSL 2 style service, but I know with ADSL style services that the way those connections operate, often it's a finite piece of fibre, perhaps from the rim back to the exchange. That has the effect of choking people's bandwidth off, regardless of their package. Can you just describe to the committee, in general, this issue of congestion in the crowded house and the constraints that you understand that DSL, copper-based technology, puts in the network?
Okay, sure. Yes, we found, and I think this came, this sort of stuff came very much more from the comments that people gave to their survey responses rather than the speeds. And what we found was that, for example, one quote we have on page 12, illustrated by a person from Mount Martha in Victoria was, and they said, "I have ADSL available on my street, Telstra wholesale equipment only, but there are not enough ports, so I can't connect to it. Have been on less than adequate 3G now for 5 months with no sign of improvement." So we identified, I think, 2 types of congestion. One was this issue where, and there were other comments by other people where the Telstra pits or nodes were already maxed out, and people just could not get ADSL because the local sort of Telstra pit was actually out of connection. So the node is either full. Yes.
So that it's maximised the number of ports available in that node, whether it's a remote integrated multiplexer or a pillar.
Yes.
I don't know if they put those ports into pillars, but if they do, and then people are put on waiting lists still. And it sounds like this is what your Mount Martha survey respondent is a victim of, and you're quite right. It just means that you can't get an ADSL connection until someone relinquishes one, or more are built. And we've had several circumstances, unfortunately, particularly in newer estates, where there's been a finite number of ports and people have been put on waiting lists. So
and that's
this poor person's on 3G. So we know they'll be paying through the nose for their data.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, because I'm quite aware that the fixed wireless 3G and 4G while from what I hear, they're now capable of some decent download speeds, but they're typically a lot more expensive, and the download quota you get per month is
exponentially more
yes,
expensive in my experience.
And this too sort of raises that issue of how if it's decided that for a particular suburb or area, NBN Co is going to use fibre to the node as the main technology to provide broadband internet access, how is that going to work if that node or area is already maxed out? Surely that means, unless part of the plan is to install a new node or upgrade it, surely that means there's the potential for people to not even be able to, even though fibre's been put to the node, they then can't get the rest of it because that node or area is already maxed out. So that was certainly the one type of congestion. And then the other type was that this increasing number of devices connected to the internet that we're having at home. Like even myself personally, I can recall sort of like maybe 2007 or 2008 when I moved into my current house, and at that time we had sort of one computer connected to the internet and occasionally a second laptop that would use wireless, and so we had two devices for the most part. But now we typically have two computers at home, an iPad and several smartphones, and so it's the number of devices and an Apple TV, and so the number of devices has tripled perhaps, and there's even talk of I guess things like fridges and other things that are going to be connected to the internet as well. So this congestion's a real issue, not just the sort of network end in a way, but just within a household, the number of devices.
Trust me, Mr. Grosvenor, I live it.
Okay. Yes.
I understand what you're talking about. Add an Xbox to that, and it starts to get really ugly.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that to us sort of pointed to needing higher speeds actually, because there were people that commented in our surveys that were getting 10 megabits per second or 15 megabits per second even, but saying once they had 2 or 3 devices all trying to sort of stream videos or be working at the same time, it was really grinding down, and that's only talking about what the current capacity is, and we know that it's going to keep increasing the demand for data and bandwidth that the NBN really needs, in our opinion, needs to sort of be able to provide that future capacity.
Mr. Grosvenor, your evidence has been extremely helpful today. Thank you very much for appearing. I think there are a couple of things we've left you with. We'd very much appreciate if you forward your next survey once the results are compiled, perhaps as a supplementary submission to the committee. We'd be most grateful.
Oh, sure.
But in the meantime, once again, congratulations for you and your team's effort. We hear you loud and clear about your points about transparency of the type of technology and what good work can be done when you actually ask the people what their experience is.
Yes.
So thank you very much for your time today. You're excused.
Great, thank you.
And I'd like to invite our next witness, Mr. Robin Eckermann, to the table, please.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Eckermann. I'd like to welcome you to this hearing of the Senate Select Committee for the National Broadband Network. For the Hansard record, could I ask you please to give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name is Robin Eckermann and I'm here as an individual, though I have a consulting practice under that name as well.
Thank you. You've provided the committee with a paper titled Getting Some Reality into Debates about NBN FTTP. Would you like to table that document, please?
Yes, if I could, please.
Thank you very much. In inviting you to make an opening statement, preferably a brief one to the committee so we have time for questions, I'd also like to acknowledge the extraordinary contribution you've made, particularly to the original open access wholesale-only network in Australia, i.e. the Transact network, and not only your technical contribution but your advocacy for broadband over many, many years now, and I warmly welcome you to give evidence today.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. As you rightly note, I have a keen interest in broadband, and it's reflected in my activities over the past 20 years. You've mentioned Transact. That was certainly one of the highlights. Some of the other highlights include involvement in most of Australia's pioneering efforts in greenfield areas, serving on the Oversight Committee for the only brownfield rollout prior to the NBN, that's the TASCOLT rollout, contributing to various policy deliberations at a Commonwealth, state and local level. I was very honoured to be part of the most regional Telecommunications Review Committee and gaining an insight into some of the issues that regional Australians face, and in general lots of other projects. For the record, I did also provide some assistance to NBN Co in relation to its role in greenfields back in 2010. However, I gracefully retracted from that involvement when I found myself in the invidious position of not being able to deter them from a particular approach that I felt was flawed and which I felt defied the Minister's instructions. The struggle that NBN Co subsequently had in greenfield, I think, is a matter of public record now. So from that background, you can safely assume I'm a passionate advocate for advanced broadband, and in that context I welcomed the announcement of the NBN as a fibre-rich approach and the right long-term vision for improving Australia's national telecommunications infrastructure. And there are many aspects of the NBN which I continue to wholeheartedly endorse. Fibre all the way to the premises, wherever it's economically practical, is the ultimate way to future-proof the performance needs of Australians. The open access model, separating local access where competition fails in large areas of the market, and separating that from services where competition can flourish, makes sense. And as you kindly noted, Transact was one of the global pioneers in that approach a decade before the NBN was conceived. I also think that some form of government intervention is needed to close the gap between the cost and standard of broadband services that are available to regional and remote Australians compared to those that are taken for granted by their urban cousins. However, it's fair to say that I've been somewhat disappointed by the early performance of NBN Co, and I fear that this may have put the entire initiative at risk, even allowing for the changes now being made under the coalition government. Most of all, I've been dismayed by the extent to which politics and often ill-informed emotions have permeated public debates around the NBN, and it was that prompted me to write this article for the Australian Journal of Telecommunications and the Digital Economy back in November last year. In that article, I sought to temper the ideological enthusiasm for fibre to the premises and nurture a more balanced view of the role of high-speed broadband now and into the future. The paper doesn't dispute fibre to the premises as the right end goal, but it argues that a waste no time, spare no expense approach could in fact set Australia back rather than accelerating it into the digital future. The paper argues that the number of users who can truly benefit from the speeds available only with fibre to the premises technology will remain low in the near future, and that cost really does matter. In this regard, it concerns me that even if the original NBN budget had been achievable, a fivefold increase in the wholesale average revenue per user had to be factored in to produce an acceptable business case. This flies in the face of every trend in the technology sector where over time users get more for the same cost or get the same for a declining cost. If those projections in the strategic plan are realised, the upward pressure that this will put on retail pricing has ominous consequences for affordability and connection rates, with more and more users likely to migrate to mobile connectivity alternatives. That in turn would increase the cost burden on the remaining NBN users and risk creating either a death spiral or a significant ongoing drain on the public purse. So in summary, I continue to support the goal of widespread fibre to the premises in Australia, but I believe we need to set aside ideologies, politics and emotions and replace this with an informed discussion of the key issues, and I'm sure this committee is contributing to that process. Progress is vital to Australia's future, but we need to take our time to get it right and to move forward in a way that, in a cost-effective way, that ensures high-speed connectivity remains affordable. And as part of that, we need interim measures to ensure that some of those most poorly served today aren't left behind waiting for a decade or more until they see any sort of improvement. So thanks again for the opportunity to meet, and I welcome any questions or discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr Eckermann. I'm quite keen to take this opportunity to exploit your knowledge of particularly the VDSL and VDSL2 styles of fibre to the node technology. We have heard that that will form part of the multi-technology mix that the coalition government is now promoting. In particular, because of your familiarity with the technology in Canberra, with a pre-existing fibre to the node network in place, i.e. the old Transact, what we call the old Transact network, now of course owned by iiNet. It does have a fibre to the node technology, which I know is upgradable to VDSL and VDSL2. I know that because I have that style of service. So I was wondering if you could, in the first instance, explain in your mind the attributes of the VDSL and VDSL2 style technologies as configured currently in the Transact network, and what such a build, a potential future build, what the attributes would be under the coalition's model of a multi-technology mix network.
Sure. Transact's network is probably the ideal because we built new copper and we took it deep into the network. There are in fact two depths of fibre in Transact's network, one at the roundabout kilometre depth and a further one at the 300 metre depth. And in recent times that network, the electronics are now past the use-by date and they've been replaced throughout the network with VDSL2 electronics, but not all users have been migrated to a VDSL2 service. The performance that users can expect under that would be at the low end, and I'm unfortunately at the low end. I'm on one of the longest copper loops.
I'm going to go home and use AusSpeed to check. So
sorry,
I'm going to go home and use AusSpeed to check. So
Good.
What's my low end?
The low end would be round about 30 megabits down and 2 to 3 up. I'm at a kilometre, 1.1 kilometres distance from the electronics. I'm getting 38 to 40 megabits down and about 3 up. Those who are fortunate to live within the 300 metre reach of the electronics are getting consistently 80 down and 20 up, though it may be choked back a little for commercial purposes.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very valid point. It depends on what package that you have purchased. I can assure you I'm nowhere near that.
It's really a function of the length and quality of copper, and Transact's copper being new is at the very highest end of the performance spectrum. As the network loads up, I understand the intention is to push electronics back out to the 300 metre point, and so for a small...
Sorry, is that in the multi-technology mix VDSL for the network, or is that in the actual Transact or iiNet network?
That's in Transact's thinking.
Okay.
That this is the way to cope with demand as it grows, is to push electronics deeper into the network, back to the same depth that the original electronics existed in the network. And at that depth, because of the high quality short cabling, everybody could get 80 down, 20 up with rock solid reliability. They are measured performance speeds in the 300 metre serving areas that the network supports. But it would be dangerous to draw conclusions about the rest of Australia from that.
Why?
Telstra's network was firstly not engineered generally to take fibre as deep as the 300 metre point, and I've not seen any plans with the NBN reconfiguration as to what depth they would actually settle at for a fibre to the node architecture. What I could say though is Telstra has been deploying a fibre to the node architecture in greenfields for the last 15 or so years. And by my rough
hang on a sec. Can we just... Are you talking about remote integrated multiplexes?
I'm talking about the cabinets, not the technology.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
So when you say fibre to the node, you're talking about the piece of fibre from the exchange to a
cabinet.
rim or to
Yeah.
a cabinet.
Yeah.
You're not talking about the
No.
fibre, the copper configuration emanating from that
the
cabinet.
copper is
or the
often
ports.
driven, as you're painfully
Indeed.
aware, at very low
Just
speeds.
checking.
Yes. However, the important thing is the cabling is in place with fibre down to a cabinet that exists already and with comparatively short copper from that cabinet to the end user. And that copper is of the order of no more than 15 years old. And the distances from the, I guess the research we did when we were building Transact was that the copper distances were typically not much more than 1 kilometre. Now, they're not the same grade of copper
No.
As we had in Transact, but I think an informed guess as to what would be possible by swapping out old RIM technologies and putting in modern DSLAMs running VDSL2 would be speeds upwards of probably 25 megabits per second.
Do you think that you could use that existing copper emanating from those rims with a reconfigured VDSL style?
Well, it would be the next...
And is the copper in a spoken wheel configuration
Yeah.
that would allow that to happen?
I believe you could, but I'm not privy to the details of Telstra's network. It would be the next cab off the rank and is a far easier case than reconfiguring fibre to the exchange where there are no cabinets in place into a fibre to the node architecture. My guess is there's between 1 million and 1.5 million homes served by Telstra copper in a fibre to the node topology, but as you point out, not being driven to its potential.
Well, that would be less than Telstra. Sorry, that would be more than Telstra have previously placed on the record, where they've said that with all of their pair gain systems, including the remote integrated multiplexes, it was about 1.2 million.
Yes.
So, but it's
in
quite
the range.
plausible that they've increased
Yes.
that number.
Yes. In general, I would expect that one of the very positive things the NBN is achieving is driving some structural separation between access and services. And if that could be retained, refurbishing that infrastructure to fibre to the node would be achievable at a very small cost compared to overbuilding with fibre. Mind you, in the long term, it would be nice to see a plan that takes it to fibre eventually.
What about maintenance of existing copper that were to be repatriated in some multi-technology mix, but obviously with this concept or this coalition concept of repatriating old copper for the purposes of using that as the last mile copper on a fibre to the node
Yes.
network?
I think that's going to be a spectrum which ranges from extremely feasible, probably most feasible in the existing fibre to the node areas because it's by definition fairly new, built in recent times, through to very impractical in the worst areas. But exactly, how that curve looks is probably only going to be understood by Telstra engineers and people who know the network intimately and know the sort of maintenance record.
Indeed. And just going back to your point about a lower quality of copper that's used in those Telstra's remote integrated multiplexes, so where they have a cabinet, what, in your understanding of the technology, what likely impact when comparing the Transact fibre to the node network and the quality of copper there, what likely degradation to speed and or efficiency and or network or broadband quality per se is likely to be impacted by that different grade of copper, or lower grade of copper?
I wouldn't expect it to be devastating, but it will be significant. The copper that Transact deployed is high quality land grade, the sort of blue cabling you see in offices, in the last 300 metres. But, for example, on the circuit that I'm connected by, there is about 900 metres of telephony grade copper before I hop onto that last 300 metres. So I'm achieving 38 megabits on something like 3/4 Telstra grade copper and 1/4 Transact grade copper.
But it's only as good as the worst bit of copper, isn't it?
That's true. It depends on the condition, the gauge of the copper,
Yes.
and as you heard from the previous witness, it can be prone to degradation if the copper is not well maintained and
Yes.
if moisture gets into joints and things like that.
Thank you. Senator Seselja.
Yeah, thank you. You've said in your submission, page 13, I think you talk about, I guess, the time dimension. In fact, that's the heading, introducing the time dimension. And you talk about, you say that many experienced industry personnel venture the opinion that rebuilding Australia's national telecommunications infrastructure with a fibre to the premises rich network is realistically more like a 15 to 20 year project. I'm interested, is that your view? Is that a realistic estimate of what it would take to do a fibre to the premises rich network across Australia?
It's a huge undertaking, and I think we've already seen from the original announcement, which was an 8-year project, it extended a little to 2021. The latest strategic report suggests the latest review report suggests 2024. So from 2009 to 2024 is a 15-year project, if it could be achieved in that time frame. It is a huge undertaking, and my concern about the timing element is if we don't have other strategies in place, someone's at the end of that long time frame, 15 years, and if there's no prospect of any upgrade until the NBN comes to their door, they're in a very unfortunate position of being really frozen out of the future for such a long time. So I think that any considered plan for moving forward has to think about what are the other interim measures to keep everybody moving forward a little bit while we put this longer-term fibre-based solution in place.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the stated approaches of the coalition government when it comes to broadband is to try and deliver upgraded services, particularly to those areas that either have no access to broadband or,
Yes.
or very, very limited broadband speeds. I mean, is that an approach that you support?
I would fully support that. And I think there is low-hanging fruit in the form of, mind you, I'm not making account of the complexities of the deal with Telstra, but setting that huge elephant aside, I think there's potential to accelerate the outcome by conscripting existing infrastructure and existing operators. The NBN as currently conceived involves NBN Co owning and operating all of the infrastructure. A potential variation would be to contract third parties to provide some of the infrastructure, but tie that into the NBN. So it's presented to retail service providers with the same interface at the same locations. And if you looked at the top 3 cabs off the rank in terms of potential there, Transact would be the first one. Its network is already delivering what the coalition have promised and is capable of getting everybody to 80 down, 20 up for a few tens of millions, as opposed to the 300 to 400 million to overbuild with fibre. That would seem a very sensible outcome if that potential could be harnessed some way. Secondly, Telstra's fibre to the node areas, I can't speak as confidently about that, but where the topology is in place, replacing the electronics would be achievable for a small fraction of the cost of totally rebuilding the network. And the third cab off the rank are the HFC networks, where 100 megabits again is possible today. Upgrades would be needed, potentially pushing fibre deeper if demand grows. But
That would be essential, surely.
yeah, well, it depends on the network and what level of sharing and what level of demand there is for higher speed services. As the demand grows and as the load comes on to the coax cabling, you have to break the segments into shorter ones. So it would be a function of demand, but there is a process for dealing with it. Those three buckets of opportunity alone, in my view, could see something like 4 million premises moving forward without huge expense and allowing NBN Co to focus on the rest of it, which it may be most practical to go straight to fibre to the premises.
So those 4 million premises you're talking about, maybe just give us a picture of what I mean, you talked about the Transact example, but more broadly, in terms of the kind of speeds, what kind of speeds could you get with that approach, and what would be a reasonable time frame, do you think, for being able to deliver such an approach?
Well, the speed on copper is always a function of distance. So if we take Telstra's network, if the depth of the equipment is 1 kilometre from the user, those users who are at the furthest reach would probably get, and I'm guessing here a little bit, but this could be tested out, with VDSL2 electronics, I'd expect they'd get at least 25 megabits speed. As you got closer to the node, the speeds would climb and they would go all the way up to 80 to 100 megabits. Excuse me. So it would meet the minimum needs of most users today. In the case of the coax networks, the pay TV networks, there's something like 2.8 million homes, I believe, passed by one or both coax networks by Telstra, Optus and iiNet. The engineering of those is different, and the issue is not one of distance from the node, but rather how big the serving areas are and how many people have to share the bandwidth. So the approach to beefing those up can involve pushing fibre deeper and replacing, where there's an amplifier today to amplify a signal, replace that with a node. Again, it could be done at a small proportion of the cost of overbuilding, allowing the focus to shift on to the less well-served areas of the market and then come back to these areas later. So it's really, in my view, it's a question of prioritisation.
So just finally on that point, you believe though that approach with the 4 million premises you talk about, that's not something that will take years and years. You think that's something that could be done relatively quickly if that's a priority?
I believe so, because most of the infrastructure's in place, and if you could find a formula for engaging the existing owners to own and operate that on behalf of NBN Co until the time came to replace it, your operational problems could be significantly alleviated as well.
Okay, you've previously written that a diligent investigation of costs to date would shed light on NBN Co budget creep, and that if there was a blowout in the actual costs in constructing the network, then there would be implications, including for broadband prices. You've now seen the strategic review, which reveals cost blowouts in completing the NBN on the previous government's model. Can you tell us what the implications of proceeding with the original NBN plan would be?
One can only speculate there, but as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it troubles me that there's an assumption of a 5-fold increase in the wholesale average revenue per user. If you look at the 2012 to 12 to 15 strategic plan, the expectation would be that NBN Co is getting about $18 per user per month in 2014. I did a quick survey of retail plans, and they range from $50 to $110. Now, if that $18 goes to $60, which was the sort of figure, 58 I think, in the original plan based on a $37 billion capital, you can imagine it's going to have an impact on retail pricing and push that up further. If the capital costs go up, then either the costs go up even further again, and you're now getting into fairly scary territory where average monthly broadband costs could well be in the $100 to $200 range. And I think at that level, you would see a lot of people drop off. Our experience in Transact was that about 10% of users can't wait to get their hands on the best available connectivity, and they would sign up, and there's no selling involved. But the vast majority of people, and they would sign up first, so they distorted your early take-up view. But the vast majority of people are driven by their hip pocket, and affordability is a very real issue. So that's why my concern about costs.
Okay.
Sure. Just following through on that issue of cost, and you go into it in quite an amount of detail in your submission, we seem to have been debating, particularly in this committee over the last few months, about which technology is appropriate, congestion, and a whole heap of things about, as you refer to it, the plumbing. My concern is that until we get a clear understanding of what you get for the money you're going to spend, you really don't have any opportunity to really understand what the price is likely to be. And we seem to have a discrepancy between what was put forward at $37.4 billion for 93% fibre to the premise. We've now got a new review that's come out and said that it's likely to be $94 billion for the same thing. You're the expert here. Tell me, how can we be 3 times out in this?
I guess I could only answer by saying that often these plans are formulated with a lot of pressure to get over the hurdle to make them viable, and that pressure tends to translate into optimism on the revenue side and very extreme conservatism on the cost side. I know that from hard experience with Transact, because we made exactly the same mistake and costs blossomed out dramatically. But I'd also make the point that invite you to point to any large infrastructure project that comes in on budget. There aren't many. That's not to say they're not a good investment, but the track record is often a doubling or trebling of the original budget. The day that the NBN was announced, I happened to meet with a colleague from ANU, and I made the comment to him, I think this is much more like a $100 billion exercise, and I haven't seen reason to change that view yet. I think it can be trimmed down. I think there are some things happening now to trim it down. I think it's actually a sound investment for Australia in the future, but my concern is that we shouldn't be rushing into it. We should really focus on minimising the costs and moving steadily towards this. Part of the reason for that is the small number of people who can actually get the benefit of high-speed connectivity today. The public debates, people tend to pick that figure of 100 megabits and think that that's the speed they'll always get. It's not. The NBN is fixing the last few kilometres of circuits that can potentially span the globe. And to highlight this the other day, I did a series of tests on my connection, connecting to a speed test server in Canberra, and I got my full 40 megabits. I connected to a speed test server in Manchester in the United Kingdom, and I got 44% of that speed. I tried one in South Dakota in the USA, and I got 31%. And just to hammer home the point, I tried Lusaka in Africa, and I got 1.5% of my speed. So it highlights the point that you can make that last few kilometres go as fast as you like, but it's only as good as the weakest link, and the weakest link is often a global chain of thousands and thousands of kilometres of all sorts of technology, operated at all sorts of different congestion ratios.
Yeah, so it's not just the weakest link in the copper, it's the weakest link in the
Absolutely.
Entire roadway.
Yeah.
Taking that a step further, you're saying, there are the 10% of people that, no matter what, they're going to buy, they're going to get it, the best, and that's what they want. We have sort of taken a view, I suppose, that everybody in Australia, we're looking to try and achieve, or that the ultimate goal is that for all of them to kind of have the kind of access that if they chose to want this, maximum capacity access, that they should be able to get it. If there's only 10% or a very small number of people who want it, what options in terms of not just the mix of technologies, but the the mix of where you can get these things. I mean, all of us don't expect to be able to get home from work driving at 110 kilometres an hour. You know, all of us don't expect to, you know, to always have access to the maximum opportunity of any particular public institution, infrastructure or whatever. I mean, how unrealistic is it to provide 100% of people with a service that only 10% of the people want, or would really seek to have or need?
It's problematic from a equity point of view, because those who sign up for the bottom end service today, that's 12 megabits on fibre, could have had that delivered over copper in many cases, and they are effectively cross-subsidising the ones who can use the 100 megabits. Over time, though, I think the demand for bandwidth will grow, and the right process, in my opinion, is that more bandwidth should be unlocked for the same price over time. And if you have a fibre infrastructure, there's no limit on how much you can unlock as time progresses. So it may only be 10% today or in the early life of the NBN Co, but as applications develop, and importantly as the global infrastructure gets updated, there's no point being a mile ahead of the rest of the world when those circuits do span the world often. But as the global infrastructure picks up, I think you'll see more and more applications that utilise the bandwidth, and if you have a fibre infrastructure in place, you can unlock more speed as and when you need it. So it is the right goal to get to, but I think we have to be very careful of how and when we get there and who does it.
Yeah. So I suppose instead of the old saying of, you know, build it and they shall come, let's wait for the demand. So put the base in place and wait for the demand to drive.
Well, it's a long...
That's not how I interpreted Mr Eckermann's evidence.
No, well, Mr Eckermann can...
I'm sure he can speak for himself.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a long process to upgrade this infrastructure, and if you didn't do anything until the demand was strongly established, you'd then probably be, again, 15 to 20 years project ahead of you to fully satisfy the demand. So I think it's very appropriate to be moving forward on our national broadband infrastructure, but it's not a race to get there tomorrow. And if part of the approach involves those people who can get real value from 100 megabits paying a little bit more in some shape or form to get it early, to me that's not a bad social outcome.
Yeah, sure. Just back on the mix of technologies, in your paper that I'm sure we all read with great interest, you made some comments about people's desire, well, either A, to go to mobile technologies if the NBN was too expensive, or that we just are a moving population and demand, the increase in demand for being able to use these technologies wherever you may be. In your view, is there any, would there be any benefit, or would it be wise to be increasing the level of investment that we're making in looking at mobile technology services as opposed to sort of totally focusing on this fibre?
Yeah, look, I would absolutely support that, and it was pleasing to see a small commitment in that direction under the coalition policy with the program to improve mobile coverage. I think a lot more could be done in that space over time, and that it's an important priority, particularly in regional Australia. People often think of mobile connectivity just in terms of phones, but as you look to automate agriculture and do all sorts of smart farming applications and so on, you often need connectivity right into the paddock, not just to the farmhouse. And mobile technology is one of the ways of delivering that. I had, in the context of a particular project here in Canberra, one of the first suburbs built with fibre to the premises was Ford, one of the new greenfield suburbs in Canberra. The number of homes that actually take a fibre connection is only about 80%, I believe. 20%, and this could be influenced by people renting homes versus owning and all sorts of factors, but of the order of 20% choose mobile-only connectivity for both their phone and their data. And as I'm sure each of you has smartphones, iPads, Androids, whatever, that whole sector is really vibrant in its innovation, and it keeps coming up with new applications that do what you need them to do using the relatively thin bandwidth of the mobile networks. So I think in urban areas the mobile networks will continue to beef up in capacity on purely commercial basis. The demand is there, the population is there, and the cell sizes will get smaller to improve capacity. But in regional Australia there's a fundamental problem in the lack of population density to support any one carrier putting in mobile infrastructure, let alone the sort of competition we enjoy in urban areas. And so I personally favour some government intervention in that space.
So I'll declare an interest. I come from the country, so I'm very interested in this particular area. So in terms of the cost effectiveness and for the delivery of the best possible outcome for our agricultural farming sector, our rural and regional communities, I'll go to the remote communities in a minute. What are you advocating that we should look to seek government assistance in providing the mobile technologies, or are you still suggesting that in some instances it would be better to look at fibre?
Really, for most of the more remote, regional and remote areas of Australia, under both Labor and Coalition plans, the intent was to use a mixture of fibre and satellite. Satellite is pragmatically the only option for the most remote users. It's just impossible to get any form of coverage-based infrastructure out there. Fixed wireless can be as good as cable. It doesn't have the same speed as a fibre connection, but it has great potential, and the most recently released report on satellite and wireless sort of outlined some of the challenges that NBN is facing there with spectrum and so forth. Ironically, NBN uses a nobbled version of mobile technology for its fixed wireless solution, and just looking at that, you would have to ask, is there not some way we can utilise that approach to also kill or reduce the problem of mobile coverage? But maybe that's something the government will look at in due course.
Are you done?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. I just want to go back to a point you made in your submission, or indeed in your paper, about the existing copper network being a tree and branch configuration from the exchange. So just putting aside the cabinets, the fibre to the cabinets and the remote integrated multiplexer configuration. Telstra, the majority of Telstra exchanges have copper emanating in a tree and branch style configuration from that exchange. In your view, based on your engineering and technical qualifications, how would you transfer that tree and branch architecture to a fibre to the node configuration, and how much of that copper would you be able to reuse from that tree and branch physical configuration to a fibre to the node configuration?
I think the first comment I'd make is I'd do it with great care and investigation of the state of the copper, because I have no doubt there'll be areas where it'll make more sense to go straight to fibre to the premises rather than having an interim step, and so that's at the worst end of the spectrum.
So you don't believe that there's any case, if copper had to be replaced to go to a new cabinet or a new node, there would be no justification to put in place new copper? You may as well go straight to fibre.
I think if you had to replace the copper, you'd be leaning towards that conclusion. There is nevertheless one very significant benefit where copper still exists, and that is that there is no cost of connecting someone. If you can use the existing lead into copper, you can literally mail them a modem and they can plug it in, and that's your installation done. When we built Transact, one of the things I got wrong in estimates was the cost of connections, and I think NBN Co has discovered exactly the same brutal reality. It's very, very expensive. I think in our model we put in an estimate of about $250 per connection, and our connection is a whole lot simpler than NBN Co's. In the early part of the rollout, real costs ran at more like $850 per connection, plus equipment, and only over time, by continually improving our processes, did we cut that back to about $550 per connection. When I was upgraded to a VDSL2 connection, was literally just walk in with a different box, plug it in, and away I went at about 5 times the speed I was previously connected at. So that's a worthwhile area of saving to be aware of, where the copper can be used. But I absolutely accept your point that if it's so degraded that it has to be replaced, then you'd have to question if it made any sense to go to fibre to the node as an interim step. And I think that will be some of the reality, that some of the areas you'll have to go straight to fibre. In part, that's my reason for favouring an approach that harnesses the existing potential of industry to get those 4 million homes that can be quickly upgraded to an interim solution and allow NBN Co to focus on the remaining part of the problem.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you very much for your time today, Mr Eckermann, and once again acknowledge your experience, particularly in relation to the Transact network, but obviously broader than that.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet with you.
Thank you. We'll now suspend for our lunch break until 2 p.m, when we'll be hearing from NBN Co, their Canberra management team. So we'll be focusing on the ACT and surrounding region and NBN's progress to date. Thank you, Mr Eckermann.
Thank you.
Ready? Hansard's ready. I'd like to reconvene this hearing of the Senate Select Committee of the National Broadband Network and welcome our next witness, Mr Greg Adcock, Chief Operating Officer, NBN Co. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name's Greg Adcock. I appear in the capacity of Chief Operating Officer of NBN Co.
Thank you. Do you wish to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions?
No, I have no opening statement to make.
Thank you. We'll go to Senator Seselja first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I might invite you to make a bit of an opening statement, but in response to a question. I'm interested if you are able to update us on the state of the rollout here in the ACT. I'm particularly interested in how things are going in terms of how many premises are connected. I know there's stats published from time to time, but perhaps you can give us some insight into how the rollout is going, how it was going with the change of government and where it's up to at the moment.
Okay, I have no problems there. The current rollout is progressing, from my information, to schedule. At the moment, as I sit here, as I took my numbers last week, we have in the ACT 23,610 brownfields premises passed and 1,937 greenfields premises passed, which gives a total fixed line premises passed of 25,547. Of those, 39.5%, or about 9,500, I understand, are activated services.
Sorry, I missed the last part of that. 9,500 are what, sorry?
Are active. They are services that have been activated.
Okay.
Of the homes passed in the ACT, as I've spoken before, I understand we currently have about 6,400 premises that are at service class 0, the majority being multi-dwelling units, and we're looking, as I've said before, at coming back and cleaning those up and bringing them up to a serviceable standard.
Okay, we spoke, I think, at the last hearing about it's not just service class 0, but there are some other classes of service which sometimes haven't actually been connected to homes. Do we have any figures on those numbers?
I believe, I was just trying to run my head around that. Service class 1, I assume, Senator, are the ones you're talking about, where there is a multi-port, but there is no lead-in to enable us to service the premise.
Yep.
I don't have that number at hand, but I'll make sure that I'll try and get that before the end of the hearing.
That'd be great. Now, of these 23,000, geographically, it's primarily Gungahlin we're talking about?
Gungahlin primarily, and one, if Sam, as I understand it, in Civic.
Okay. And is there a suburb by suburb breakdown?
I can get that for you. I don't have it at hand, but clearly there would be a suburb by suburb breakdown. I seem to recall at the last hearing, Senator Conroy asked specifically about 6 suburbs.
Yep.
From memory, they were, not from memory, they were Bonner, Ford, Casey, Crace, Franklin and Hamilton, which I believe was meant to be Harrison.
I was wondering where Hamilton was. Yes.
Sorry. And I believe, and they are all included, yes.
Okay. And I'm interested, we heard from a previous witness, Robin Eckerman, today, and he was talking about particularly the Transact network and other things, and the ability to upgrade that network, and obviously as an alternative potentially to rolling out new fibre to the premises for the NBN. What examination has been done of some of those options here in Canberra, particularly given we do have a pretty good existing network in Transact, but perhaps comparable to other parts of Australia?
NBN Co has acquired Transact's fibre to the premise assets, as you would know, and I understand that there is now an existing fibre to the node network. There is an amount of planning going on at the moment based on the selection criteria around the multi-technology mix, at which point in time, once an optimum technology deployment for any particular area is recommended, we would have a look at the existing assets of all carriers and make a commercial call on whether it would be best to acquire existing assets or not.
Sure, but in terms of acquiring, it's one thing to acquire the existing assets, then it's another thing as to what kind of technology mix or technology upgrades you apply. Yeah. What's being considered there, for instance, with the Transact network?
At this point in time, given that we're still going through the planning rounds and everything is still subject to the outcome of the Telstra agreements, it would be premature to be engaging in any.
Nothing to do with Telstra.
Sorry?
It doesn't have anything to do with Telstra, it's the Transact network.
No, I understand that, but what we're trying to ascertain is what is the existing footprint that would come with Telstra, and then what are our options for the balance, of which the Transact network, as you say, may be one. There'll be fixed wireless considerations, satellite considerations. It's all part of the planning methodology. And we're not in a position to engage in those discussions at this point in time. But I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination they're off the table. I suppose the latitude that's been given NBN Co under the current policy is to explore what is the most cost-effective and efficient way to deliver high-speed broadband to all of Australians.
I might come back, Chair.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to pick up there. When you say latitude under the current policy, what's your analysis to date of the quality of the Transact VDSL network in the context of the services they're currently providing, and for all intents and purposes, is that as good as it gets for Canberra residents who are on that existing Transact footprint? I should clarify that, the Transact VDSL footprint.
I get that. I'm not aware of any particular analysis that has been done of the Transact network at this point in time.
Well, why did you buy it?
We bought the fibre to the premise assets to avoid duplication of rolling out fibre over building the existing fibre to the premise network. The discussion at the time that the transaction was undertaken, and as you would know, that was well and truly before my time at NBN Co, but those discussions were had under the policy of your government, and those discussions were had to avoid overbuilding fibre. So I believe, and I can check it, but I believe quite logically that those discussions were limited to the fibre to the premise footprint, which are the assets that were ultimately acquired.
One of the issues facing Canberrans has been, and I know we've been through this many times, the changes in the way the maps were presented online. When the coalition government was elected, a vast number of FSAMs disappeared off the maps, and we've had long conversations about that. What I'm interested to know is where in NBN Co's planning are those lost maps, if you like, and what are the expectations of Canberra residents who were in that original footprint. Some 90,000 people, a third of Canberra, were in those original footprints up to the 2016 rollout. Now, without getting into the debate about the characterisation of those maps, I think we've certainly made it clear from the previous government's perspective that was about the forward construction plan. But can you tell us where we're likely to get fibre to the premise outside of the existing FSAMs that we know currently have fibre to the premise, and they are in the suburbs that you mentioned previously?
Okay. So, Senator, without, as you said, re-prosecuting the discussion around the maps, I think it's fair to say that, again, you've articulated the view of yourself and other senators. The NBN Co position remains that the maps as previously presented were structured around information that would have set expectations that were, I suppose, not realistic. And that's why, again, before my time, but every time I come to these meetings, the issues of the maps have brought up, so I continue to go back and try and educate myself on the rationale. So
let me ask the question a different way, Mr Adcock.
Sure.
What are NBN Co's plans to expand the rollout of fibre to the premise in the Canberra region?
The NBN Co plans are currently being formulated. I've said that on many, many occasions. We have, at the moment, very tight negotiations with Telstra, and a lot of what we do going forward is predicated on the outcome of those negotiations, which, you know, quite publicly, I am excluded from. We will get to a point when we know and understand the asset base that we have to work with, and then we'll be able to plan forward across all technologies: fibre to the premise, fibre to the node, fibre to the distribution point, fixed wireless and satellite, the most efficient and the most cost-effective way of delivering high-speed broadband to all of Canberrans.
Yeah.
And there will be a mix of fibre to the premise.
Yep, I've heard all of this rhetoric before. I'm just trying to drill down as to exactly what work is taking place in Canberra at the moment.
Chair, sorry, with respect, I mean, it's not rhetoric for Mr Adcock to be answering your question. He has to put the context around. You say, the maps showed X, he suggests that maybe the maps showed Y. It's quite legitimate for him to put context around his question. I don't think we need the sort of badgering tone that stops him from properly answering it. I mean, surely Mr Adcock should be able to answer the question in the way that he sees fit, not in the way that you would like him to answer the question.
Just trying to be efficient with my use of time. If Mr Adcock would like to fill his time up, restating positions previously stated, be my guest. We'll have you back another day.
I'm sorry, that was not the intent. I was just trying to contextualise what it was that I was providing. And the basic position is that it would be improper for me to speculate what technology high-speed broadband would be delivered to Canberrans at this point in time, absent the knowledge of what was available to us as a result of the Telstra negotiations, and then doing some proper planning around that. It's extremely, it's fluid at the moment while we go through that process.
So what subcontractors does NBN Co have on the ground here in Canberra at the moment, and how many employees do they have doing actual work?
NBN Co's key contractor on the ground here at the moment is a company called QC Communications. What subcontractors they have engaged is not something that I have at my fingertips. I'm sure if you want me to take it away and come back, I can do that. We are in discussions with a second provider at the moment, but that's not finalised. So again, it would be inappropriate for me to perhaps jeopardise those discussions by, stating any particular company. And as to, what is the labour force on the ground, again, that's a matter for our contractor. They are meeting the current schedule commitments for the work that they're undertaking.
So what work is being undertaken right now here in Canberra? Like if one of my constituents said, what is NBN Co currently undertaking here in Canberra? What do I tell them?
Well, I understand, and again, I was just looking through, we understand we have currently 2 FSAMs under construction, which represents about 6,500 or 6,000 premises, and we've got another 7 FSAMs under detailed design.
Okay, so let's just, for the sake of the record, go through these FSAMs precisely. So can you just, for the record, state which FSAMs are currently completed and have their pending switch over?
Okay, I believe I have that available. If you could just bear with me for a minute. So at the moment, with construction complete, we have FSAMs that are known to me as CRACE 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8.
So can you tell me which suburbs are 7 and 8?
I can take that on notice and come back
Well,
to
do you have
with
someone
those.
behind you who could tell you? Because the map I've got at the moment has the CRACE exchange 1 through to 6, and that covers Ngunnawal, Amaroo, the suburb of Gungahlin, Harrison, Palmerston and Mitchell, and part of North Watson, or North Watson. But I can't see 7 and 8 on the map that I have got off your website.
Okay, well, I can answer that. CRACE 7 and 8, as I understand, were originally Bonner 1, 2 and were part of the Transact migration.
So forward.
Again, I'm not au fait with the suburb names in Canberra, so...
Okay, perhaps you could check with someone behind you. But my understanding, if it's a Transact built a fibre to the premise network in Ford.
Yeah.
If you've purchased that, then that is likely to be Ford.
And Senator Lundy, yes, I've just had it confirmed that it is Ford.
Okay. So Bonner is 7 and Ford is 8.
I can have it confirmed as well.
All right.
We'll find out for you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Okay, so they're the 8 FSAMs that are currently, as you say, finalised. You mentioned FSAMs under construction. Could you please now list those?
I believe they are Civic 1 and 2.
Civic 1 and 2. And are you able to tell us which suburbs they cover?
From my broad understanding of the ACT region, I believe they are in the city centre itself.
Yeah. And some of Braddon?
The point of interconnect is Braddon, and from an engineering perspective, it makes sense to roll the network out from the point of interconnect out. So I'll confirm that, but my assumption is that that would be correct. Braddon is part of the CBD.
So they're the only two FSAMs in the Canberra region currently under construction? Just to confirm.
Again, could I please confirm what you take as the Canberra region? Do you include Queanbeyan?
Yeah, we would like to know about Queanbeyan if there's work going on there, yes.
I understand that Queanbeyan 3 currently has a contract instruction issued, so...
And are you able to tell us what suburb that is?
No, I am not, but I'll take it on notice and come back.
Okay, so just going back to, so Queanbeyan 3, it looks like that's part of Queanbeyan East and Crestwood. But we'll take,
Yeah, you'll have to...
if you could provide us with a...
Senator, because, as I said, you are much closer to the Canberra area than I am.
Right, so just going to the civic area, actually, let me, for completion, I'll ask you which FSAMs are under detailed design work, what you describe as detailed design work. And we know from previous conversations they won't be on your maps.
No, they won't.
No. So which ones are they, please?
At this point in time, the FSAMs under design are Civic 3, 4, 5 and 6.
Okay. What about in Gungahlin? Are there any other suburbs, given there are some gaps in Gungahlin, being Franklin and Nichols and Casey? Is detailed design work being undertaken in those three areas?
I'll have to take that on notice. As I said, Senator, I was not appraised of all the detail of the ACT coming in here today, but I will certainly come back to you on that.
Okay. Is there any detailed design work taking place in Queanbeyan?
Not at this point in time.
So just going back to my reference point, which was the previous maps, where Queanbeyan 6 and 4 were on the map, they're no longer on the map. And just to confirm, there is no detailed design work going on in Queanbeyan 4 FSAM or Queanbeyan 6 FSAM.
Senator, again, we always get tripped up in here on nomenclature and what we have in our minds as detailed design. I can confirm with you that Queanbeyan 4 and 6 do have remediation notices now executed, which means that remediation of the network will commence and the detailed design has concluded.
Has been completed?
Yes.
Okay, so detailed design work on Queanbeyan 6 and 4 has been completed.
Correct, and there is a commencement notice issued to commence build preparation.
So this covers Crestwood, Queanbeyan East and the Ridgeway.
If that is the
And
map you
parts
have
of
before
Greenley.
you, as it was originally Queanbeyan 4 and 6, then I'd say that is correct.
Okay.
I have said previously, Senator, and I stand by this, that as we get more and more confidence in our internal processes in NBN Co and our ability to keep our delivery partners, our RSPs, and in fact the wider community informed, we will be re-releasing more and more information onto our maps, and that will then we will all get onto the same language around design,
Sure.
build preparation.
Yeah, no, I'm trying not to use
construction. No, that's
the language
that's
that will
okay.
get us into a trap.
I don't want to do
because,
that. Yeah.
frankly, what Canberra and Queanbeyan are hungry for at the moment is just real information about what's going on here. So we've established the completed FSAMs, the FSAMs under construction, the detailed design work that either has taken place or is taking place. Can I ask, for the sake of completeness, are there any other FSAMs for which the detailed design work has been completed but construction has not yet started and therefore it's not showing up on these maps?
Not at this point in time, no.
No. So we're still dealing effectively within those original footprints.
We're dealing within the footprints of the boundaries of the FSAMs that have been designed, yes, and we're looking forward, planning, what is the best technology for the rest of the ACT.
Okay. So in the FSAMs that we've discussed today, can you confirm that it will be fibre to the premise in each of those FSAMs?
Yes, I can.
Okay. At what stage, and I know, given your answer before, that you said you're assessing everything else, have you reached a conclusion about any other geographic area in Canberra that NBN knows will require fibre to the premise because of the pre-existing nature of the technology? For example, the areas affected by Telstra's RIM configuration in their network.
And I don't want to extend answers, but we can't make any. It would be improper to make any predictions until we understand the nature of the assets that we got and the technology that is capable to be deployed into Telstra's existing network with reuse of the infrastructure that we may acquire as part of the negotiations. Okay.
Can I ask you whether or not you would, as far as considerations to date about the Transact network and their VDSL network, are you currently assessing that footprint and whether or not a fibre overbuild will be necessary in that footprint?
I think I answered that earlier when I said I don't believe that there is any assessment of Transact's VDSL network going on at this point in time until we understand the nature of the assets we acquire and the reach of those from other negotiations that are going on.
But surely you would need to understand the nature of the asset you already acquire in Transact's network before you were to engage in negotiations with Telstra, because the Transact network was an overbuild. So surely you would need that to inform any conversation you were having with Telstra at the moment about the nature of their network.
Again, I'll restate it for the record. I am, by nature of my contract and my departure from Telstra and commencement with NBN Co, specifically excluded from those negotiations. At this point in time, what I can state is that the fibre assets of Transact have been acquired and are being deployed into the NBN network, and the broader footprint is subject to a whole range of planning considerations, including existing network in that footprint, which at some point in time, again, I can't, given the nature of the conversations that are going on with Telstra at the moment, be sure at what point in time that will be, but all physical infrastructure will be considered to deliver the most cost-effective and expeditious rollout of high-speed broadband to Canberrans.
But given that, I mean, we took some evidence this morning and the phrase low-hanging fruit was used. Can you advise whether or not it's NBN Co's intention to deliver a fast bandwidth product as fast as possible? And that to me would point to some analysis required of the Transact network in the first instance. You say that's not happening at the moment, but surely that would be a good example of picking a bit of the low-hanging fruit to get people onto an open access, wholesale only, hopefully more competitive piece of infrastructure, and therefore satisfy some of the demand.
NBN Co's objective is to deliver high-speed broadband to all Australians as cost-effectively and as expeditiously as possible. I have no doubt that at the appropriate time...
You don't know?
At the appropriate time, the analysis of the Transnet network and every other network that may be available to NBN Co will be considered.
Sure.
There is discussions at the moment about re-engaging with some of the power utilities around their networks. Now, I have no view at this point in time as to whether that is an existing network overlaying the Transnet network in Canberra. But, all options will be explored, and to the extent there is low-hanging fruit that meets our technical requirements, of course that would be considered.
Okay. Well, you're obviously not the right person to ask about the sequencing of those conversations, but it would seem to me to be common sense that before you entered into any negotiations with Telstra that you understood the nature and capability of your existing asset in the Transact network.
We absolutely understand the capability of our existing asset in the Transact network. That is the fibre to the premise network that we've acquired.
So why
We
is it
understand that
necessary to
completely.
negotiate with Telstra or to finalise your negotiations with Telstra before you start looking at what that network can deliver for customers?
The negotiations with Telstra have nothing to do with the fibre to the premise network within the Transact footprint.
But you just told me, perhaps I misunderstood, the reason you can't make definitive statements about where you're going with Canberra is because all of these things are up in the air because of your commercial negotiations with Telstra.
I think, Senator, if I take a deep breath, we are talking at cross purposes. Transact has a number of networks in the ACT region, as I understand it. NBN Co has acquired the fibre to the premise assets of Transact, and we are now deploying them actively into our network. Transact also has, as I understand it, fibre to the node assets that we haven't acquired, and as we haven't understood, nor is it at this point in time our priority to understand, as I was saying, the utilities fibre assets, all the other potential regional players' fibre assets and fibre to the node assets. We are doing, and again, I'm only on the sidelines of this, but there is a rather substantial negotiation going on with Telstra and Optus at the moment for the acquisition of their assets as a primary vehicle for rolling out high-speed broadband as cost-effectively and efficiently as possible.
Yeah, all right. You have clarified one thing for me, but I think you're not able to, you don't have enough knowledge, with due respect, about the specific ACT circumstances. We are quite unique here because of the presence of that Transact network. It is an asset, as you say, of IINet at the moment, but how that intersects with NBN's considerations obviously is of paramount interest to the residents of the ACT.
And I have no doubt, as I said, those discussions will be had at an appropriate point in time, and as soon as it's cleared and we understand which direction we're going. I think the commitment has been made and reiterated on a number of occasions. We will make that information available when we have certainty, and we don't publish information that may lead to false expectations.
Okay, so can we go back to the two FSAMs that are under construction? I think you said they were the Civic 5, 6, 3, 4, 5 and 6.
No, I said Civic 3, 4, 5 and 6 were under detailed design.
Oh, sorry, under detailed design work. Okay, so can you give me a time frame on the likely start of construction on the back of that detailed design work?
At this point in time, no. As I sit here, the detailed design work is going on, and as we've just established, on the basis of that, the detailed design work is going on around a fibre to the premise product. But it's as we go through those designs, and again, this was the whole issue around putting information on websites. There are decisions to be made as the design, becomes more and more apparent. So, it is the intent at the moment to, bring them up to a state of construction. But, we will continue to iterate around, the technology, the cost, the deployment standards.
Okay, so the detailed design work taking place on 3, 4, 5 and 6. I thought we'd already established that they would be fibre to the premise.
As I said, we established, and again I can correct myself, that Queanbeyan 4 and 6 are fibre to the premise, and that Civic 3, 4, 5 and 6 are planned to be fibre to the premise
Planned
at this point
to
in
be
time,
fibre to the premise.
but they are in design.
So
When
but
the
this is-
design proves out, we'll confirm them and make that information available.
So what does that mean, that you're in that design work, you're also looking at other forms of technology, potentially?
As the design progresses, there are many parameters that are looked at. Again, I think the change in approach between the two policies is, as you know, quite rightly, the previous policy was to deliver fibre to the premise, and so all the design processes were geared to delivering a fibre to the premise product. Under the revised policy, there are gates through which designs have to go to establish what the ultimate access technology will be for delivering high-speed broadband. At this point in time, as we're doing the design, I'm quite happy to state that it is the intent that 3, 4, 5 and 6 are currently being designed around a fibre to the premise product. Absolutely. Should there be things discovered in the design that would, I think, challenge or bring that assumption to a reasonable question that says, okay, there's a more efficient and a more cost-effective way to do it, or these parameters need to be considered, then they would be considered, which is why, again, I don't want to go back to the maps discussion, but that's why, we're now at contract issued. We're looking at coming back to when the remediations, when the build preparation starts, because that's the ultimate commitment. At this point in time, it is the intent, but I'd say not the commitment yet.
Okay.
And I'm not playing semantics or words. It's just a statement of the process that we're going through at the moment.
So just to go out to Queanbeyan, with construction having been completed?
There is no construction completed in Queanbeyan. There is construction commenced in Queanbeyan 3, I think we discussed, and there is build preparation or remediation commencing in 4 and 6, and they will be committed fibre to the premise.
Okay, and that means construction is imminent, does it not?
That means construction is imminent.
So what can you give me on imminent for Queanbeyan? How far away for 6 and 4?
I'm more than happy to revert with a planned date. If not by the conclusion of this session, certainly within the next 24 hours.
Okay. So back out to Gungahlin.
Yeah.
And now I know you've taken on notice to get some more information, but because there are some still some gaps, if you like, in Gungahlin that don't appear to be on your program for detailed design work as yet, being Nichols and Franklin and Casey. So could you take on notice, if you can't answer today, what the status of those suburbs are within your forward plans?
I will do that. And just so I've got it absolutely clear, they are the suburbs of Nichols, Franklin and Casey in the Gungahlin region.
Yep, and on the map that I have, which was taken from your website, potentially the suburb of Crace itself, not to be confused with the Crace Exchange, which is actually in the suburb of Gungahlin, which is a suburb, not the area of Gungahlin,
Yes,
which is the whole region.
Got it.
Very good. Okay.
You can see how at times we cross paths unintentionally.
There's some very bandwidth-hungry people all over Canberra, Mr Adcock, and they've been waiting a very long time to have their broadband needs met.
Senator Lundy, I accept that.
Mr Adcock, there were in the original maps under the previous government, about a third of Canberra projected. Now, I know that you've said that they have been removed from the maps, and they, based on the questions I've asked you today, you're not in a position to give us anything about those suburbs at all, or those other areas. So this is, I guess, and just the opportunity I'll give you. Is there any other suburb or FSAM on your information in front of you that you can give us about Canberra's future? Because otherwise those people are still left with pretty much nothing except, you know, in due course, when NBN Co does work on their multi-technology mix, we'll see what comes out of that lucky dip. I mean, I'm not trying to be pejorative deliberately, but that's really, they've gone from hopeful of getting the NBN within a time frame to now not knowing if they're going to get a fibre to the premise form of the NBN within any time frame. So is there any other suburbs, any brownfield sites that you're able to point to that work is taking place, any greenfield sites where work is taking place, either at the design stage or even at a preliminary assessment stage, that you're able to place on the record today?
Just to contextualise, I understand your point, well made yet again, about the maps coming down. The people that you refer to of the ACT are in the same boat as many people who had expectations set on information that was aspirational, to say the least.
Well, I don't want to have a political debate with you about that, Mr Adcock, so I think...
I'm trying to bring it back to facts, which is what the issue is.
But to say that those maps were aspirational, I think, is a misrepresentation. That was the plan of the company at that time.
The aspirational plan of the company at the time?
Well, you can flavour it however you like. I'll still challenge you on it.
Okay.
It was the plan. It was certainly the policy of the government, and everything else in between, I know, has been contested by the new government. But that doesn't remove the fact that those plans and maps were in place.
Correct. And as I said, when the policy changed to a multi-technology mix, again, to try and ensure that people weren't left with expectations that were not going to be delivered on, it was wound back, and we're now trying to push forward. So to your point in the ACT, I understand around when you say fibre to the premise, you know, I understand that, again, it was before my time, but the Transact acquisition included around 4,500 premises that are in the plan stage where Transact are engaged by NBN Co to build fibre to the premise to those predominantly new developments. So I haven't got the specific geographies of those, but you know, there's at least 4,500 premises that are currently planned to be fibre to the premise, and Transact is actively engaged in building those for us.
So where are they specifically?
I think I just said I don't have the specific geographies, but I'm sure you'll ask me to take that on notice and come back to you.
Well, it'd be great if we could get that information today. This is the one opportunity we have to try and clarify the current status of the build. So if you could perhaps seek to get that information while you're still at the table, that would be most helpful.
I'm getting the positive nods.
I'm seeing nods.
Which is a wonderful thing. You can... I can only use my revision mirror.
Yeah.
And as I said, to the rest of the ACT, it is predicated on the planning algorithms of the multi-technology mix, of which fibre to the premise is one of the options available to us.
Mr Adcock, because of your position, I presume you've got a reasonable grasp of some of those multi-technology factors that come into play. Is that a reasonable assumption of mine.
At the risk of leading with my chin, multi-technology factors, are you talking about planning algorithms?
Not necessarily. I'm talking about attributes of existing technology and how their current design and capability could feed into your assessment of the future multi-technology mix. All right.
Let's explore it.
Okay, so one of the biggest sources of frustration for hungry bandwidth users is the presence of RIMs, or remote integrated multiplexes, within the physical Telstra network. There's pluses and minuses for a potential multi-technology mix in those RIMs, because they usually have fibre to them, although sometimes not a particularly fat pipe. And then they have tails of copper emanating from that node. Based on your knowledge and understanding, are those remote integrated multiplexes, those cabinets, likely, or are they suitable for a node configuration under your multi-technology mix?
The cabinetry deployed in the Telstra network has been deployed over many years, as you know. I think they've been the subject to discussions in this forum for quite some years. Depending on the outcomes of the negotiations with Telstra and access to the technology, to the extent that they can be utilised again, I'm sure that would be an option that would be looked at. To pick up on something you said earlier, should it prove to be some low-hanging fruit that delivers high-speed broadband to the sort of requirements or the objectives of NBN Co, then that is certainly something that would be looked at.
One of the key
you know yourself, to just make a bold statement about RIM cabinets, it depends on generation.
Well, the reason I raise it is because many pockets in Canberra and Queanbeyan, and quite often it's in the newer estates, the ones that have been built in the last 15 years or so, that are serviced by these cabinets. They have a finite ability to deliver ADSL, let alone ADSL 2+. And I still hear of people who are not able to get an ADSL service of any kind because all of the ports within those cabinets have been utilised. And so they're left in a situation of being on a waiting list, and the only option being very expensive mobile data and some mitigation work by Transact in the provision of terrestrial wireless. So again, it's some of the areas that were on the previous maps were areas that were what I call RIM affected and bandwidth deprived as a result. And that's why I'm so interested to find out what NBN Co's plans are, looking specifically at those RIM affected areas, given the bandwidth deprivation that subsequently occurs and where people aren't even able to get onto an ADSL style service. Surely that represents an opportunity for NBN Co to focus on those areas.
NBN Co has an obligation to deliver high-speed broadband to all Australians, and with the technology out there at the moment as RIM cabinets, NBN Co has an obligation to find a way around that, and if it's reutilising the RIM cabinet, and that is the most cost-effective and efficient way to get high-speed broadband to those people, then that would be an option we would consider. To the extent that option isn't available because of engineering limitations or backhaul limitations, then the onus is on NBN Co to find a solution to make sure those end users are serviced to the minimum standards required under the policy of the government.
But my interest in representing my constituency, I'm sure any parliamentarian would sit before you and say the same thing, is to support our constituency in accessing as fast a bandwidth as quickly as possible.
I understand that, Senator, and again, the challenge for us as an organisation is to meet, your obligations to your constituents and everyone else covering basically 100% of Australia. So what we're doing is we're having a look at what options are available to us to get the network rolled out and to get high-speed broadband available to all of Australians as efficiently and cost-effectively as possible, but under any potential program, have it all rolled out by the beginning of calendar 2020, as I understand is the policy of the day. So we certainly have our challenges ahead of us.
Indeed. So have you got that information yet? It's still coming.
The answer's no, but it's coming.
I think with the...
Were you getting any questions?
yeah, I think last time I asked for a question, you had finished. So if you've got questions, you need to ask.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have questions, Senator Siselda?
I have more, and I think Senator Ruston has something. So.
Sorry?
I have more, and I think Senator Ruston also has a question or two.
Okay, Senator Ruston.
Okay. Just this morning we were had a gentleman gave evidence, and one of the things that he made the comment about was that you're only as strong as the weakest link in your entire your sort of road of communication.
Yep.
And he made the comment that it would be possibly not necessarily the best way to go to move very rapidly to try and connect everybody in Australia up to the ultimate, the highest speeds, that because the world was moving and other, components of the communication chain weren't moving at the same speed, that maybe it would be more expedient for us to be taking a more staged and considered approach to the rollout of the NBN. Have you got a comment on that from NBN's perspective? I mean, does that fit within your current policy framework?
Senator, we've got a stake in the ground that basically says, we'll have high-speed broadband available to all Australians by 2020, the end of 2019. That in and of itself is a huge challenge, and we are attempting to stage the rollout to meet that commitment. The point that the speed of delivery is only as fast as the weakest link in the chain, and I think that's the analogy that was being drawn, is absolutely correct. If we're providing a 50 megabit down service, but there's some link in the chain that's only passing it through at 10, you'll never get any more than 10. I wouldn't say that the lack of speed in the sort of global networks is influencing our planning in any way. We are doing as best as we can just to meet the commitment to get high-speed broadband to everybody as quickly as possible. I'm sorry I didn't hear the evidence this morning.
No, that's okay. It was an interesting piece of evidence and an analogy that I hadn't heard before in terms of just the speed of sort of the international or global changes. So, but one of the terms that you often hear used, particularly in relation to newer states and the like, is adequately served. I'm just interested in what adequately served actually means, and how do you define adequately served?
I have been accused of treading on the toes of the department before, and I don't want to do that. That's a policy. Adequately served is a policy discussion with the department, and I think it's best they take that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all.
Can I just follow on from your earlier answers, and you're talking about the aspirational maps, I think was your term. I'm interested I think I wanted to get to the bottom of that, because obviously there is a reason why they were taken down.
Yeah.
In your view, so for Canberra, and you can talk more broadly if you'd like, but there were many Canberrans who saw those maps and expected to get fibre to the premises relatively soon. What is your view of, I guess, the accuracy of those forecasts or contained within the maps. Do you believe that they were accurate? Do you believe that what was put out there and the expectations that were built up, were they reasonable?
Again, I'm not. It's not my role to prejudge those of the past. As Senator Lundy put out earlier, they were the targets of the company of the day, and that was before my time. When I turned up, and given my background and my knowledge of the workflows that were happening from my days in Telstra, any pressure test of the ability to deliver against those targets failed any credibility test. And it's not a judgment statement, it's just a statement of fact. The workforces were not there to deliver against that program. What was put on the map and purported to be construction commenced, as I recall, was if somebody had done a very, very, very preliminary design. And so what was attempted to do was say, okay, to your point earlier, Senator Lundy, if there is a contract instruction out there and there are people working, you can take a fair degree of confidence that that is going to be built. As I said, and I've said it before, and we'll get there, the next step back from that is when we issue a commencement notice to start remediating the network to take fibre to the premise, you can be reasonably confident that that's going to be delivered. Beyond that, and again, with the change of government and the change of planning criteria that are currently being developed across multi-technology, even as late as the design phase, you have options. And so, again, if the expectation is to deliver a high-speed broadband, that's one thing, and what access technology that is delivered across is a planning and engineering option for NBN Co, as long as we get the high-speed broadband to the end user.
I'm sorry if I can. I've got to follow up, and you've been dominating. I've asked a couple of questions in the last half an hour, and I'd like to finish this line of questioning.
One more question, and then we're finished.
It's not just a Labor Party opportunity to ask questions, Senator Lundy.
Senator Seselja, ask your question.
Thank you. I
or
will.
Relinquish.
I can understand why you're sensitive on this point, because clearly from your evidence there, Mr Adcock, it appears that the maps put forward by the previous government were giving a misleading impression to the people of Canberra in relation to what they were to expect.
You cannot verbal the witness, Senator Seselja.
I'm not verbling the witness. And
that is an opinion by a different government and a different technology mix.
I can understand why you're sensitive on this, Senator Lundy.
Senator Seselja, come to order now.
I'm asking questions.
Come to order. Okay, you cannot verbal the witness. We've already established that. If you have a question, I direct you to ask it now.
So you're now directing me how to ask questions.
No, I'm directing you to ask a question.
Is this the nature of these hearings?
Ask your question.
I've asked a question and I'm asking a follow-up. I'm giving my impression, and so I'll repeat it. My impression.
Senator Seselja, if you want to come here to put on a show, save it for the Senate.
My impression of what you've said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the maps that were there before were giving an incorrect impression to Canberrans as to what they could expect in relation to broadband services from the NBN and when they could expect it. Is that a fair assessment?
I would limit my comments to the facts. The maps that were previously represented on the NBN Co website were put up there when very, very preliminary design had been contemplated, but the label that was given was construction commenced. And so therein lies the dilemma. I think the labelling was incorrect. There had been, and again, to the extent that the construction commenced led people to believe that there was building in the streets, that was an impression that was incorrect.
So in many cases where it said construction commenced, that simply wasn't the case.
In the traditional meaning of the word construction, as in people are actually out there building stuff, that was not the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as we have established, some design work had of course started, so it became a question of definitions. The point is that under the previous government and under the previous methodologies, that was the intention of the company to deliver those outcomes. That is no longer the intention of the company. We've established today where we will get fibre to the premise. And do you have those 2 suburbs?
We will get them
Okay,
to you,
so
Senator.
just before we wrap things up, I just want to clarify that I've asked the questions about what areas where detailed design work has commenced, and they're the suburbs that you're not able to, or FSAMs that you're not able now to provide the committee because you don't have that information readily available, and you'll take those questions on notice.
That's correct.
I've also asked the question about other areas, whether they be brownfields or greenfields, where any work is taking place, and you're yet to come back to us whether there's any other footprint in Canberra where work may be taking place.
If you say so, Senator.
Yes,
I
no,
understood
that's-
I answered that on the 4,500 premises that were part of the Transact acquisition but did not have fibre yet, where we were relatively...
But you can't tell me where they are.
No, but I'll tell you where those 4,500 are,
That's
to the
correct.
extent that information is available. I believe it is.
Yeah, no, we're just trying to fill in the gaps,
That's okay.
Mr Adcock, of what exactly is happening here in Canberra. We've not been able to achieve that because you don't have all the information at hand, and you've taken some questions on notice. But I can assure you, as soon as we get those answers, we'll be promoting that amongst the Canberra community so they
That's
know.
good. That's great.
And in the meantime, to the best of your understanding, the outstanding FSAMs around Civic, being 3, 4, 5 and 6, your best understanding is that they will get their fibre to the premises.
Please, you did just caution Senator Zzelchik for
I said
verbling
with
me.
your
What I said was
best
they're under
intentions. You did
detailed
say
design, and the intent of that
the
detailed
intent.
design
The intent of
is
that.
fibre to the premise. However, they are under the detailed design, and
Right.
until
No,
those
it's
designs
an important
are finalised
clarification.
and approved, then I wouldn't be standing up here setting any expectations in the minds of people in Civic 3, 4, 5 and 6.
And we have established that the 2 additional FSAMs that are now under construction in Queanbeyan, or not under construction, that had completed their design phase, are currently in remediation and will be getting fibre to the premise.
The construction, the commencement notice for remediation of the network to the standard required by fibre has been issued, yes.
Okay, and that is for FSAMs 4 and 6
FSAMs 4 and 6
in Queanbeyan.
in Queanbeyan.
And you're still yet to answer my question about the remaining suburbs in Gungahlin, Casey, Crace, Nichols and Franklin.
Nichols, Franklin, Casey and Crace, and Crace the suburb, not Crace the exchange area.
Correct.
Got it.
And you're going to come back to me with the status of those suburbs.
I will come back to you with the status of those suburbs.
We're hoping you'll say design details being worked on.
Thank you, Senator. I'll come back with the facts.
Thank you very much, Mr Adcock. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Senator.
There may be an opportunity, of course, to come back and ask more detailed questions, but we'll see what answers you come back with that you've taken on notice.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could provide the questions on notice by the 13th of June.
Okay.
Yeah,
13th
that
of
gives
June
you...
is-
if you could provide them sooner, you've undertaken to get
Yeah,
things
some
back
of
to
them.
us today. If you could get those back to us within 24 hours, that would be most helpful.
Obviously, we'll get those to you. If I told you, the ones
Yeah,
that
no,
are just a
you're the
matter of
one-
me getting
Yeah,
information.
no, you're the one that was
But-
saying you could get the answers
Yeah,
today.
again-
They haven't come through today,
And
so
to
I
the
would
extent I get
expect...
them to you today, will that extinguish the question on notice, or will we have to answer it again?
No, you don't have to answer it again.
I was just that I got some through last time that we'd answered on the day, but that's okay. It's all good.
Oh,
I just don't want to sit with questions.
Yeah,
and
no,
refer
well,
to
that's a
answer.
conversation, please, to have with the committee
I
to
will.
clarify.
It's all good.
Don't want to make work for you.
Do a lot. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your time today.
I'll give that
I thank
impression.
my colleagues. Thank you, Hansard and staff. And I declare this hearing closed.